Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the World Chess Championship match in 2021 between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Today is November 30th, and the score is all tied up at 1.5 out of 3 with 3 draws in the first games. And today is the birthday of Magnus Carlsen. So happy birthday, Magnus. This is game number 4. Coming off of a rest day, the players had a day to recuperate, play some football, not play some football, play some basketball, not play some basketball. I don't know. We didn't get a whole lot of footage. I think we did see Magnus kicking a ball. If you follow some sort of social media, the question really is, what's going to be played? Because the other day, Magnus went for d4 and he got some decent chances in a Catalan. It was a fighting and insane game. Is Magnus going to continue his trend of changing it up all the time like he did in the World Championship in 2018? And the answer is yes. Because just because it worked once doesn't mean that necessarily you have to go back for it a second time. e4 is played. What is Jan going to do? If this is a random open, there's a chance that Jan plays the Sicilian. Jan has also been dabbling in the French defense, but it's the World Chess Championship, so we're going to see e4, e5, because the truth is, this is the meta. This is like the 3-3 in Overwatch. All right? I'm pretty sure that's an apt comparison. Knight f3. Now, interestingly enough, Jan does not allow a Spanish, and I have a suspicion that if he played knight c6, bishop b5, like Fabiano said, he would have expected a Berlin, which is when you attack the pawn immediately on e4, popularized in the World Championship match in the year 2000, but maybe there would have been bishop c4 or d4, the Scotch. Instead of this, Jan plays knight f6, so he actually, he copies the Fabiano strategy. I mean, that's probably not why he played it, but I'm just saying that's what Fabiano did in the year 2018, which is play the Petrov. Not even allow white to develop the bishop, just immediately attacking the pawn on e4 with the pawn on e5 under attack. Petrov has been played by many Russian players, been played by Fabiano Caruana exclusively, and a lot of Chinese players as well like to employ the Petrov as a way of neutralizing e4. We have knight takes e5, and here Jan actually already makes a mistake, as far as I'm concerned. He plays the main line and the best move in the position. He does not play the Stafford Gambit. Now, Eric Rosen somewhere probably clutched at his stomach and fell out of a chair, wincing in pain. We had an opportunity to see the first ever Stafford Gambit in a World Championship match. It would have made history. Jan probably would have lost in anywhere between 20 and 25 moves, but he plays the main line, which is the move d6, and now he takes on e4. Now, here white has two very distinct strategies. The first of which is to play knight to c3. This is known as the classical variation against the Petrov. And the point is that you take with your d-pawn, you then proceed to develop your bishops, you long castle, and we have a battle where this king is here, and the game is extremely imbalanced. However, Magnus plays not knight c3, he plays d4, and now black plays d5. So spending an extra move moving this pawn, but it's okay because now both players have established something in the center. And the reason why this is even played, because this just looks symmetrical and boring and stupid, is the fact that black has committed this knight here and wasted kind of a move on getting this pawn into the middle. So white will now create play against this knight and against this pawn with moves like c4, knight c3, and so on. So that's kind of like the inherent imbalance in the position. There's been thousands of games played. So we see bishop to d3. Black here has two main lines. Three that have been played historically. Knight c6 has been played a lot, putting the knight in front of the c-pawn, breaking some rules, but the knight can always jump to b4. Knight c6 is actually really sort of designed to be a kind of an anti-c4, because now you can sneak in here, take this bishop. But, okay, I mean, there's also bishop e7 after bishop d3. But we have bishop d6. This has sort of been the modern top-level trend. Like, you put your bishop there, I'm going to put my bishop there too. Both sides castle, and now we have c4. Super trendy main line. Black reinforces the center with the pawn on c6. And here there are 4 moves that are played by white to try to challenge the black position. The first move is knight c3, which is just developing the knight behind the c-pawn. And just so you understand, this is not the move played in the game, but I just want you to understand the degree of theoretical battleground that might ensue, okay? Everything I'm about to show you has been played many times before. Both players must be familiar with it. The line goes takes, 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 and let's say black develops the bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. White unpins, Black finishes development. White plays knight g5, threatening mate in 1. Black plays knight f6, and white chases this bishop. The bishop doesn't want to be passive, so it tries to hang around on this diagonal. White plays the move f4, trying to trap the bishop with g4 and f5. Black plays h6, now we have g4, a sacrifice temporarily of the piece. f6 and h5 are both under attack. b5 countershot on the other side, sacrificing the knight, and now rather than taking again, you have this move, sacrificing the bishop, but infiltrating on the king and trying to cut it off and checkmate it. White desperately tries to scramble for defense as the king runs away to cover. Black comes in with a trade of bishops, a rook sacrifice, and gets back a bishop and a rook. And now we have the following position that ends in a draw by repetition. Even this on move 32 has been played like 25 times. So it's just insane what's out there theoretically. And so for that reason, maybe knight c3 is not what we want to do. There might be, I mean, and besides bishop g4, there's other lines. Just so you're aware. Instead of knight c3, white can also take. White can play here. But in this game, Magnus Carlsen chooses rook to e1. So there is so much out there. Just be glad you don't even know about it. Just be glad you can join me here for this game 4 recap and for me to just kind of tell you what's happening in the plan of the position. And again, it's all about that base and no treble, and, you know, it's all about the knight on e4 and the pawn on d5. So Jan plays bishop f5, and Magnus immediately takes advantage of the bishop leaving and jumps out to b3 with his queen attacking the pawn on b7. So the bishop abandons the queenside, queen b3, very common in queenside positions, queen pawn positions. Now we have the move queen d7. That's actually a newer move. This move is played about 1/4 of the time as the move knight to a6. So probably he had something prepared in knight a6. Queen d7 has been played recently by Arjun Erigaisi of India. Knight a6 is a very interesting move, also trying to fight over here. The tactics of the position after queen takes b7 being that knight b4 attacks the bishop and traps the queen. The queen is trapped. I mean, like, it has no escape. So it can just be used as a target for the remainder of the game. So queen d7 is played. We have knight c3, takes, and now an interesting move, taking on f5. The point being, this knight hangs. Queen b7 looks like it traps a rook. It doesn't, because if you play queen takes b7, there is this move, and then if you take the rook, your queen is dead. So you can go get caught with your hand in the cookie jar there. So you cannot go get the rook. Knight comes back to b6. Levy, I mean, there's c5. Yeah, well, I mean, I have another way of winning your queen. So the bishop will take back, and when I sack. So that doesn't work. Instead of that, we have b takes. Now b6. Now here we have cd5, cd5, queen b5. Believe it or not, this position was also reached at top level, this position, in many GM games. There's a game Anand Duda from Vaikanze in 2019, a tournament in the Netherlands, when we had bishop g5, and then this position was on the board. So just interesting that on move 14, Anand played a, kind of a unique way about the position. MVL in the past has played, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave has played rook b1 here. Rook b1, rook, right? So the point, by the way, that's also not hanging, just so anyone's confused. That's also not hanging. Bishop takes h2 would be a tremendous blunder. Discovered check. Always look for checks for your opponent as well. Magnus plays a4. This was seen in the game between Michael Adams and, oh my god, I'm blanking on the name, Alexander Morozevich. Morozevich, one of the greatest Russian players of all time, one of the most creative players of all time. Morozevich was a beast. This was in Vaikanze in 2005. So 14 years before the other game. So there's these wrinkles, right? Like, this is super GM chess. I mean, you got to go between 12 and 18 moves deep. In fact, in this game, after takes, a5, this is Black's 17th move. The only 3 games ever played in this position went en passant. Those players were cultured. They were Reddit/anarchy chess enthusiasts before the subreddit even existed. Magnus Carlsen breaks protocol and instead plays a novelty, the move knight to h4, clearly trying to play knight to f5. And now we have our first move of the entire game. Let the fun begin. Now, just before we proceed along here in this game, I would like to tell you something. You might be very confused why on the 18th move, they have traded 2 pawns, a queen, and 2 minor pieces, bishop and knight. You might say, I don't understand how you're supposed to create winning chances. Well, The analogy that I thought about while getting coffee this morning to present to you in the recap is probably something like wine tasting. You really cannot tell the difference, but I mean, at least I can't, between, that's what I'm told, you can't tell the difference unless you're really experienced, between a $70 and a $200 and a $1,000 wine. You really need to be digging in this world for years. You need to have a tremendous amount of experience to really appreciate the imbalances of a position like this, and why knight h4 is so interesting. Fabiano Caruana was like, wow, this is an extremely interesting move. I mean, this guy was like, I have not considered this, etc. Like, I mean, so the point is that Magnus has two plans here. Knight to f5, but when you stop knight to f5, Magnus has a second point. And that second point is the move g4. The point of g4 is twofold. Number one, preventing obviously any sort of expansion, but number two, you want to go knight back this way and maybe take this pawn, but also maybe knight d1, knight b2, knight a4 to attack b6. Now that seems mildly outlandish and probably a little bit of a joke. You can also get the knight like with c4 to go attack this weakness, but let's just pause and look at the position real quick. Black, because Magnus didn't take en passant like all the other games, has an a pawn. That a pawn is now an asset. The b pawn is a liability, yes, but so is this b pawn, right? Now, what is the major liability in the white position? The c3 pawn. So rook c8 is most likely going to happen. So that's like the dynamic of the position, not to mention that the move g4 can also be used as a clamp. You can play bishop h6 and g5, restricting the position if this knight ever lands over here and clamped in, right? So now it's up to Jan to figure this out. Jan develops his knight. I mean, that's not a very complicated move. Magnus plays knight g2, and here Jan can choose between immediately knight to f6 attacking the pawn, or the move that he played in the game, which is rook c8. Now, knight f6 looks very tempting. Here, the top engine suggestion is to play this, force the rook to move, let's say it goes here, knight to e3, giving this pawn away temporarily, proceeding with this clamp, and playing something that looks like this, where the bishop and the pawn clamp down the king forever. The rook is just constantly threatening to infiltrate. Black is in time for counterplay on these pawns, but white does have a potentially promising position where there's back rank made at all times, and it actually does look very dangerous. It really does. I mean, now that goes to show you why knight h4 was played in the first place. Jan doesn't allow any of this. Jan plays rook fc8, so he's not going to get hit with tempo. Magnus here plays a very nice move, plays bishop f4. This is a danger levels moment where this pawn doesn't have to be addressed, right? And here, if Jan takes, which is the most natural looking move, there also is this completely absurd engine suggestion to keep the tension of the bishops. If a human plays that, not only should they be drug tested, they should probably just get the SHIT just slapped out of them. I had to spell it out in case any toddlers were watching. Like, you know, you spell COOKIE, cookie, so they don't know you're talking about a cookie. Yeah, well, just in case any children will need to spell that word out. It's a family-friendly channel for the most part. Bishop takes f4, knight takes f4, rook c3, knight d5, and rook d3. Jan has infiltrated, and his rook is going to try to start picking up some of these pawns. He also has the a pawn. Now, what are the problems of the black position? The weakness on b6, the really passive situation of the knight on d7, and potentially the fact that your king is going to get cramped in here. So, what happens now? We have rook to e7 and knight to f8. And at this point, Magnus Carlsen spent like 30 minutes. 30 minutes were spent in this position. Why? Well, let's say he takes on b6. Black will move this rook to b8. After knight to d5, the pawn will be won. Both players' b pawns are gone. But it's actually white who has the problems. Somehow this king and this horse are just very well insulated. It's really difficult to do anything here with white. Like if you play rook e5 setting up check and the winning of this rook, I can play king g7. I can probably even come down here, and two rooks on the second rank are really going to be a problem, not to mention the hanging of still all of these pawns. So rather than taking on b6, you know, white needs to start considering what to do, and Magnus decides to give a check. We have king g7. We have the threat of repetition, by the way. We can play like here, here, repeat a couple times. He does play knight e8. And here he plays d5. So that is what's known as a tactical defense of a piece, right? So that pawn cannot be taken because there is knight to f6 check. This rook protects this knight. Now, black can't really move. Like, black really doesn't have that many moves. I mean, if black really should not play a move like rook c8, because that's not what you want. You actually want the rook behind the pawn so you can escort the pawn down the board. That rook c8 is a bad move. Because now white will play knight f6, finish this clamp, like king g7, g5, then push the d-pawn, maybe bring the rook over. The only thing preventing white from doing whatever he wants in this position is the constant existence of the a-pawn. That is how close this game is in the balance. I know it might look boring, but again, think about wine tasting. It's just the slightest of wrinkles that makes the game totally different at this level. And unfortunately, when the players have potentially 6 hours to play a chess game, the nuances are microscopic, okay? So instead of rook c8, Jan just plays a4 because Magnus will not be able to do anything he wants in the position as long as there's counterplay, okay? So now, Anish, Fabiano, Anand, we're all talking about the different plans in the position that potentially white can play here. So one of the plans in this position is to play... well, actually, first, let's actually talk about the clamp, like g5. This is the first plan, to clamp, right? And what is black going to play? Black is, of course, going to play a3. That pawn is just inching closer to the finish line. It's going to go to a2 if you allow it, because then the rook is completely paralyzed. Then we have 3 pieces completely paralyzed in this position. So just 3 pieces that are kind of stuck together in an unbreakable bond. Magnus now... can continue with 2 very distinct plans. The first plan is pushing the h-pawn. So for example, h4. This is one of the plans that he can do. Black now can respond in kind of an interesting way. He can play like h6 in some moments, and if knight e8 check, he can lose this pawn. This is one of the variations, just lose the pawn. Play knight h7, and now it's actually white who is paralyzed, although for the cost of a pawn. Now, those pawns are absolutely frozen. It's a bit nerve-wracking to sacrifice like this, but now there is no more knight f6. If there's no more knight f6, then the threat of king f8 is very real because you're forking the king and the rook and the knight. So there is this one plan, h4, h6. There is also h4, a2. But now, you know, this rook will come back and go and try to get this pawn. But if the rook comes back and goes to try to get this pawn, there is this move. So now 4 rooks are stuck in an unbreakable bond, right? So h4 is one of the key plans of this position after the move a3. Another plan is to pass the move back to black first with the move king g2. Like if a2 is played, okay, now we will go for this kind of plan. And then maybe you will continue with h4, etc. Maybe you will go rook e7 and try to pressure this pawn, maybe get over here. Again, the problem is that your rook can't really move. There is a third plan in this position, which Fabiano talked about, which is just playing the move d6. Just play the move d6. You can also play this move at some other moment, but the point is this. Like, now you give me this, right? So let's say, you know, d6, knight e6 attacking the pawn over here, you play d7. The point is this pawn cannot be taken because rook e8 looks kind of interesting, right? Like now you're really trying to push through here. But what's interesting is that after something like d7, like let's say black plays rook d8, rook e8, and I don't know, literally any move, h6. You still can't break through. There's still no way through. You would need to risk everything. I mean, you would need to start pushing all your pawns, right? So that is another possibility to play d6, d7. Magnus spent an hour calculating all this stuff at different moments. He spent, like I said, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. He thought for legitimately an hour we were waiting to see what he was going to do. And Magnus Carlsen repeated moves and made a draw. So, before I talk about the summary of this game and what this means moving forward, I want to say that Anish Giri hypothesized something very interesting here. If you made it this far in the recap, don't go anywhere. You already made it this far, right? So you're gonna be, draw it, idiots, I'm gone. Anish Giri hypothesized that Magnus, his team which came up with the idea of knight to h4 on move 18, basically didn't fully mention to him that there is just equality from Black's perspective. They kind of angled it toward, you have all these different plans, like g5, getting the knight to f6, and, you can push for an advantage. This is what Anish Giri said. I'm not saying this. Anish Giri said he thinks they were letting him figure out the position rather than kind of warning him of all the risks. They wanted the GOAT of endgames to try to create something in the position, and it didn't work. I mean, it didn't work, unfortunately. He decided to kind of play it a little bit more safe and not push all his pieces forward and potentially, make something happen for Black on the A file. So that's an interesting theory. I have no idea how true it is, but this is interesting. So now we know that Jan is going to go to the Petrov for the match. We know that in the main line, Magnus still hasn't tried knight c3, which of course leads to very imbalanced positions, but we know that this variation has been neutralized, although we only saw rook e1, which is the third or fourth most popular move in this position. It took Magnus 18 moves to come up with a novelty. It had an interesting positional nuance to it. Jan defended almost effortlessly and ended with a 45-minute lead on the clock, and Magnus ended up bailing with a perpetual. So 2-2 after 4 games. Tomorrow we have Jan again with the white pieces. Will we see another e4 and a discussion in the Spanish? I think we won't. If we do, I will be shocked. And that's it, folks. Happy birthday once again to Magnus. Yeah, don't be frustrated. Sometimes we have games like this where a little bit of nothing happens. We just get kind of, 3 hours of foreplay and then no big moment. But that's the World Championship for you. The margin of error is super thin. And sometimes we just need to let the wrinkle occur on the 18th move and a draw to happen on the 30th, all right? They're trying their best. Today wasn't the most perfect thing, but let's hold the pitchforks for the next 10 games. I will see you for game number 5. Appreciate your support as always. All these recaps have been getting almost 500,000 views. Your support has been unbelievable. I'm reading the comments. I'm pinning some of the comments. And I look forward to the next recap. Get out of here.